Please support my lord.
Sorry, are you not Edward Coffer?
Kofa, indeed, my
I
lord.
apologize.
I heard Mr. Willis give a different name.
The first name.
Yes,
Thank you, my lord.
Ms. Coffer.
Mr. Tyson, good morning.
Good morning.
We are going to start from where we ended last time. And the question that I had asked last time was whether or not your thesis talks about African culture or practice, and you specifically indicated that it is wide use. Am I correct?
I beg your pardon?
You said that it refers to wide use of cannabis.
Widespread use. Yes.
Widespread use.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
I also indicate in there part of the reason why I say there was widespread use was because of the different ways it was used in the different, like the games that I indicate that we used around it. But I don't deal with it specifically within specific African cultures. All I was trying to do there was to demonstrate that it was widespread. Yes.
In your thesis, of course, you refer to the use by the white population, by the Indian population, the colored population, the Zulus, the Swazis, and the Sutus. So yes.
Yeah. I don't refer to it specifically in the. Well, it's not intended to be specifically that cultural grouping or in the cultural sense. I refer to the Xhosa, Sotho, Swazi, for example, in order to give a geographic location for it. Yeah.
Okay. Then what I want to understand is, as I had taken you earlier to the pleadings at volume 2.
May I?
Sorry, file 1.
File 1.
Yes.
All right.
We had discussed page 22 thereof.
Page 22. Pleadings.
Page
right.
22. Page 22, my lord.
22.
Yes.
All right.
And what I had sought to demonstrate from page 22 was the reference to racism, specifically at paragraph 13.3.1.2.
Yes.
Now, if we can once again read that into the record. It says, the prohibition is therefore inconsistent with the basic requirements of the South African Constitution that requires all exercise of public power to adhere to the principles of legality and rationality.
Mm-hmm.
It is irrational for the following reasons. Then at that specific paragraph you say, the legislative history of the prohibition of cannabis show that it has at all times been motivated by reasoning that relied on racist and imperialist notions of what medicinal and recreational substance use is acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Coffer, I thought I heard you say that you say, meaning this witness says that.
Well, we referred to
This
this.
is the particulars of claim, is it not?
Indeed, my lord. When we referred to the witness last week, he actually accepted that this mimics his very own theory in his own thesis.
Are you saying, do I believe that the legislative history of prohibition of cannabis has at all times been motivated by reasoning that relied on racist and imperialist notions of what medicinal and recreational substance use is acceptable? Just to draw it all together for my... That's right?
That is correct.
Yes, I accept that.
Thank you
Yes.
very much. I was thinking maybe we might disagree.
I'm sorry, the legal format is not what I'm used to, so I've got to jump between.
Thank you
bits.
very much. So you do agree that this is how you frame your understanding of the effect. Now, let's go back to
Which effect?
cannabis being prohibited, cannabis not being legal.
In South Africa, yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Now, because of course, maybe I should say this to say, whenever I ask questions, it is in the South African context. I will not be going outside to other legislations particularly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just
Sorry,
want
in
to,
what context?
clarify.
South African legal system
South
in the South
Africa.
African context. Yes, my lord. Now, what you have said earlier now, and the cultures and the different groups that we have referred to, we've spoken about use of cannabis through the white culture, through the Indian culture, colored culture, the Sothos, the Zulus, and the Swazis, for example.
Well, I wouldn't say I've spoken about the use as a cultural thing. I've spoken about the use
Wide
in
use.
those societies more broadly. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what this demonstrates is that it means all cultures, in fact, most of the cultures, enjoyed the use of cannabis. Do you
Well,
agree with me?
No, I'm not really comfortable with the discussion on culture here. I don't investigate the use of culture. We can say societies.
Okay.
And different parts of the population used cannabis in different ways to different degrees.
Are you aware of a certain part of society that did not use cannabis?
I think it was very rare in certain parts of society, and that changes over time. But again, as a historian, I have to ask you where and when, because that will shift quite a lot over time.
Okay, let's go back to the question.
Okay?
You have referred to numerous societies. And the reason why I refer to these cultures is as you have dealt with them in your thesis. You refer to the white culture. Well, I don't know if you want to say white society. You refer to
I'd
the...
prefer to say society.
Thank you very much. Let's stick to society. I'm happy with that. White society, Indian society, colored society, the different black societies, if I may say so.
Yes, I would argue that to a certain extent that was one society in a pre-colonial state, even though there were competing political interests. But yeah, that's why I pointed out that my reference to, for example, Zulu or Xhosa or Sotho was a geographical reference more than a social reference.
I'm happy with that.
Good.
So now, agreeing that even the black society enjoyed the use of cannabis at that very same prehistoric time that you make pre-colonial time,
yes.
that you refer to.
Yes?
You now, as we have now read the pleadings that I referred to just now,
Yes?
the reference to racism says that, in fact, I would like to put this, my lord, I would like to put this in a simpler way so that it does not create some form of controversy. What you say is the apartheid regime came into place, and one of the things that happened is that they took away the use of cannabis. And effectively, as we have read paragraph 13.3.1.2, the basis
yes.
was racist.
Yes?
Now, how do we connect that with the fact that all societies used cannabis, widely so?
First of all, I think you're getting a bit confused. I'm not referring to the
Assist
apartheid
me.
regime. The apartheid regime, from a historical perspective, we would only say began to really come into being from 1948. Before that, we're speaking about the colonial regime, which is a more global regime. I would say that the colonial regime was what took away the use of cannabis, as you put it. And I would say that their reasoning was racist. Now, there may have been, and no doubt there are isolated reports of colonists or, should we say, white colonial society, members of white colonial society, who used cannabis. That use would have been exceptionally rare, though. So I'm not quite sure what answer you're looking for.
My question is this. You are saying there was wide use of cannabis throughout different societies.
To varying degrees. I'd say that in pre-colonial society there was a widespread use I'm willing to say that. Yes.
We don't have the you have not provided us with the statistics of how much percentage of what society was using
No,
cannabis.
as I explained on Monday, there were no census conducted. It was a time when statistics hadn't really become a thing yet. There wasn't much documentation in the pre-colonial era. And as I pointed out on Monday, that's the very reason why we rely on ethnographic accounts, traveler accounts. That's why we look at the writings of Europeans, where we look within there and see where they mention the use of cannabis and how they mention the use of cannabis. And when we collect all of those sources together, we can start to see a pattern. So yes, even though we can't tell how many people were there, how many people were using cannabis, we can infer from those reports that it was used in a number of different places and in a number of different ways. And that indicates a widespread use, and it indicates a thriving trade in certain places. And it also indicates quite an extended time of use because of the different ways of use. For example, the games, the development of pipes, that kind of thing.
Mr. Patterson,
Yes?
how do you define wide use?
Widespread use, that it was commonly found across southern Africa, and that it was commonly used across southern Africa.
Across most societies, or all societies of South Africa?
In the pre-colonial era, I would say yes. Part of that would have been limited by the cultivation, where, for example, in the Western Cape and the Northern Cape, as it's called today, cannabis wouldn't have grown so well. Also, the way of life of the people living in the Western Cape and the Northern Cape would have been more nomadic. So we can expect that there would have been less grown there, and that means that there would have been more trade from the areas where it grows very well. Yeah.
Okay, so what you're saying is that widespread use means that most of the societies in South Africa had access and use of cannabis.
I don't think it would need to be most, but I think if we look at our society today, we wouldn't say that most people doing something would mean that it's
I'm
not
happy.
widespread.
I'm happy for us to stick to your thesis and your research on historical use.
Yeah, I'm just using an analogy to describe it. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You see, I'm trying to understand your meaning of widespread use, because you've identified various societies.
Mm-hmm.
And having identified those various societies, I'm trying to understand hence my question, is there any particular society that you can identify which did not use cannabis?
It would have varied over time. So some societies, I mean, there are reports from Zambia, I think, where cannabis use was very frowned upon for a time. There are also reports from very close to there where at a different time it was almost used as a sacrament. So this is the thing with history, that over time things will change and the context will change and the mores of the society will change as well.
You are aware, and maybe I must go back and say, whenever I ask questions about use widespread, I will refer mostly to South Africa.
Yes, but you did ask me for an example, so I thought.
Hence, when I talk about
a
society,
when
I talk about a society, I would like you to refer me to any society within South Africa.
All right.
That any society that you are aware of in South Africa that did not use cannabis.
Well, if I can provide an example that can illuminate the way that we conduct history, I'll provide that as well.
So you don't have that right now?
Yes, I do. I just said it. It's in Zambia, though.
Let's go to your conclusion, Mr. Patterson, at page 846.
846, is that file 2?
That's file 4.
File 4.
Yes.
Will I need this file again?
I would like you to just be able to look at both.
Okay.
Just for a bit.
4. Which page did you say?
846.
846. All right, yes.
Now, I'm not going to read through, it's paragraph conclusion 2.2, subparagraph 2.2.1.2.
Yes.
We have dealt this paragraph at length
Yes, we have, yeah.
on Monday. But I would like to refer to it once again. It says, conclusion, given entirely all of the above, the expert will say that it is often forgotten that a substance which is illegal was not always so.
Mm-hmm.
The history of the prohibition of cannabis does not find ground in rationality, reason, science, or good lawmaking, but rather in racism, irrationality, social Darwinism, poor politics, and non-science.
Yes.
Now, my focus now is on racism.
Yes.
Okay. So what, and the expert here is supposed to be you, who says that the substance that we're talking about, the prohibition of cannabis, does not find ground in all those things that you have tabulated for us. Is that correct?
Are you saying, do I agree with 2.1.2?
They're your conclusions, are they not your conclusions?
Yes, I do agree. I've said
Yes.
that already, yeah.
Now, from the cultures that you have now given us, numerous cultures using cannabis,
Yes.
and we are talking about cultures both from white societies to the black society. Do you still want to say that racism is applicable?
Yes.
How so?
Because if we look at the time where cannabis was prohibited legislatively in South Africa, we see that the law was an incredibly racist law based on social Darwinism and the idea of ethnopsychiatry. It was a racist system that gave the idea that there was a threat posed by cannabis and other vices to white society. It was a racist law.
Mr. Patterson, let's look at page 22 again.
All right.
Paragraph 13.3.
13.3, yes.
It is irrational for the following reasons. The legislative history of the prohibition of cannabis show that it has at all times been motivated by reasoning that denied the mores of indigenous African societies.
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
I do. At the time of prohibiting cannabis, I believe that that's a fair statement to make.
Do you believe the same statement now?
Well, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, let's go to the same 13.3.1.
Okay.
You say, you refer to the word that at all times.
Yes.
At all times.
Yes.
Should this period include 1994 to date?
No, but that's not the legislative history of the prohibition of cannabis. And anyway, I didn't write this.
I know you did not write it, but I'm just saying, you said you agree with the statement, so I'm trying to understand.
Well, I agree that it has relied on racist and imperialist notions. I see what you're saying, and that I don't think is a question for me to answer. I guess that would rely on whether the motivation behind the different laws changing, and especially around 1994, whether they had updated the reasoning. I guess I would say that if the reasoning behind the law was the same in 1994, or what would it be, 1992, as it was in 1922 or 1928 or 1937, then yes, then I would agree with that statement. If there has been a change, then I guess I would.
Okay, my apologies, Ms. Patterson. You see, what I'm trying to get to maybe briefly, and I think you did concede when you were cross-examined by the senior counsel for the state, that you do not know anything about the laws that have taken place since 1994 until now.
Well, I mean, I know what's contained in the law of 1992, but I mean, I'm up here as an historian, and I'm very clear on that. I'm not here to give a lay opinion. I'm here to provide the court with historical information, and that's what I feel qualified to do.
You indicated earlier that you were not very comfortable with chapters 3 and 4, at least
Yes, that's
most
true.
aspects.
Yes, yes.
Now, let's go to chapter 1 of your thesis.
Chapter 1.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'd like to refer you specifically
Chapter 1. Which page on chapter 1?
let's refer you to page 865.
Oh, that's the introduction.
Yes, that's
Yes.
okay.
Okay.
The second paragraph, or the third paragraph, actually.
Chapter 1 describes.
Yes.
Yes?
Can you read that into the record, please?
Chapter 1 describes the Southern African cannabis trade at the time of European settlement at the Cape in 1652 and examines the changes wrought by the settlement on the region's cannabis trade throughout the late 17th, 18th and early 19th centuries. Including a discussion on pre-colonial use, cultivation and the trade of cannabis, this chapter shows both how the European settlers incorporated themselves into the economic environment of cannabis trading and how they altered this environment after establishing political power in the region.
So this basically covers, or summarily covers, what your chapter 1 talks about.
I would say so.
Thank you. Now
There
let's-
are other bits of chapter 1, but yeah.
There are other bits, actually. You're
As
right.
it's relevant to this case, I
If
think
we
that
go to
that's-
page 870, you do talk about what else is contained in chapter
sorry,
1.
ma'am, what page?
870.
70. Okay.
The second last paragraph.
Yes.
You say on the last 3 lines from the bottom,
Last
these
3
two
lines.
main themes are the focus of chapter 2, prohibition, and chapters 3 and 4, resistance, respectively.
Yes.
Chapter 1 is intended to provide a conceptual background for these discussions,
Yes, amongst other things, yes.
amongst
Yeah.
other things.
Yeah.
Now, let's look at chapter 2. You talk about chapter 2 at page 866,
866. All right.
at the second paragraph. It says, chapter 2 addresses the period circa 1850 to 1970 and investigate reasons for the illegality of cannabis. It deals with the growing moral panic surrounding the use of drugs from the 1850s until the prohibition of cannabis in 1922, and also deals with the request made by the Union of South Africa to have international legislation passed against cannabis in 1923.
Yes.
Then you go further, just further down. This period in South African history is marked by the rise of the segregationist state and the entrenchment of racist laws.
Yes.
I situate the prohibition of cannabis in this greater climate of moral panic over the threat posed by so-called primitive types of the politically dominant colonist.
Yes.
It is argued that the prohibition of cannabis in South Africa was an almost inadvertent result of attempts to scientifically justify colonial oppression.
Yes.
That South Africa became the first country to request that international restrictions be placed on cannabis makes chapter 2 vital in the understanding of the plant's international prohibition.
Yeah.
Now, you have indicated further in your chapter,
Which page
particularly
are we referring to?
in your thesis at page 893, I think you talk about
893.
that.
Yes. Okay.
And particularly at page 910, you talk about South Africa's involvement and the letter that it wrote.
910. Yes.
Now, I want to understand if what you are saying in your evidence is that there was no war on cannabis nothing had been done on the fight against the use of cannabis, internationally or otherwise, but for the first letter that was written by South Africa.
No, that's not true at all.
I'm saying I'm trying to understand if that's what you're saying.
Oh, that's not what I'm saying, no.
Okay. So you are not saying that South Africa is the first country to perpetuate war on cannabis use?
No, I think it was quite common across the colonies, but also I think war is a very bad way of
I think
putting
that's
it.
the word you used, though.
I think that the idea of the war on drugs was something that came later. Legislative moves against cannabis would be the best way of putting it. There were controls on the drug. If we look at India, for example, and even, in fact, the 1922 Act in South Africa, and it's the same in the United States. The United States is probably the most obvious example, because what they would do is they would make it a taxation issue. So the plant itself wouldn't be prohibited, but they would say that it required a tax stamp, for example. So then they just wouldn't issue any tax stamps, and that was their way of controlling it in the United States. The same applied in 1922. It was only the 1928 Act that actually prohibited it. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because around the world, we did see restrictions on the plant. We did see a panic about the plant. We can see that in the evidence provided to the British Parliament in the 1870s, which led to the establishment of the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission. If you look at the section that I wrote on the Indian Immigrants Commission report, you'll see that I mentioned there that there were a number of that the Commission mentioned a number of places where there were already restrictions on the plant. Those were all through taxation as well. It's interesting to note that all those places mentioned were where large Indian populations had been moved from India to other colonies. But there certainly was discussion around it. The interesting thing about South Africa asking for this to happen was that it was happening during a moral panic in the country. And my understanding here is that, yes, there were these other debates going on, but that South Africa was the one pushing forward with asking for international prohibition, where other countries that had similar debates weren't asking for international prohibition. I find that very interesting. And I do think that indicates just that South Africa was the country that requested cannabis be applied to international or included in international legislation does indicate that South Africa was a large part of the international prohibition of cannabis.
Well, I would like to just refer, and I believe, unfortunately, I do not have a copy of this, but however, there is the International Opium Convention that took place in 1912. Are you aware of that convention?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I haven't studied it directly, but I'm aware of it. It's related, yeah.
And of course, 1912 means 11 years, some 11 years before South Africa wrote a letter to.
Yes, yes.
Correct.
Yes.
Now.
This was where Italy brought it up, eh?
It was in The Hague.
No, please continue. Yeah.
In fact, they drew up the convention, and the purpose was to deal with the issue of cannabis and cannabis prohibition.
The Opium Convention, it was there to deal with opium and, to an extent, cocaine.
Not just cocaine. Let's go into the object. Well, I'll just refer you briefly because it would have been easier if I had printed it for you.
Yes, it would have, yeah.
But just to give you a brief synopsis, it says the conference, which drew up this convention, expressed the view that...
Sorry, I have to interrupt you. Where are you reading from?
My Lord, I'm just trying to paraphrase the basis of the International Opium Convention. I've not printed that out.
No,
I was just reading it out.
The witness says it was nothing to do with cannabis, it had to do with opium, and you are now reading from somewhere.
Indeed.
So I just wanted to know where you're reading from.
Indeed, my Lord, I apologize. I do not have the actual document for the witness, but because he had said he was aware of it, I thought it would be helpful just to read.
I haven't studied it directly, but I mean, I've read small bits and pieces on it. I don't think I could speak with any authority on it. I could tell you what I know of it, but I couldn't promise that it's correct.
Okay.
You're reading Are you reading from what you say is the International Opium Convention?
Of 1912, my lord, yes, indeed.
But you don't have a copy?
I don't have a copy for the witness, no. I was just because he had actually said that he is aware of it, and he had...
No, for the court.
Indeed, for the court, my lord. I think I'll make sure that I have a copy available
Thank
for the
you.
court. I apologize, my lord.
My lord, just as a point of clarity, I didn't understand my learned friend to say that she was reading from the convention itself, but paraphrasing or perhaps from notes she'd made on the convention.
Yes.
Just as a point
Is
of
that
clarity.
correct?
I took the abstract, my lord, on the convention itself. Of course, I took certain abstracts on it. I'm not reading from the entire convention itself.
Yes, you
But
see,
I will have...
my concern is that you are putting something that you say appears in that Opium Convention abstract, but I don't have it before me, neither does the witness.
Indeed so, my lord.
Yes.
In fact, the only reason I was actually going into it was because the witness was saying he was aware of it.
But I'm not.
Indeed, my lord, indeed.
Well, I'd like to clarify that. I mean, I'm aware that the convention took place, and I have seen it mentioned before, but to say I'm familiar with the 1912 Opium Convention is like exaggeration. Yeah.
Mr. Patterson, what I wanted to understand from you, since you're saying was whether you could even dispute at all that it dealt with cannabis.
I believe that cannabis was mentioned at that convention.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
that there were certain discussions that were brought up by some countries around that convention. Yes.
Thank you. My lord, if I may just have a minute.
Yes, certainly.
So having indicated, Mr. Patterson, that in fact in your previous cross-examination you indicated that you could very well come to different conclusions on chapter 3 and 4.
Yes.
And of course you explained the reasons why.
Yes.
I will not go into chapters 3 and 4 on that basis.
That's fair enough. Thank you.
Now, what we will then do is to base everything else on chapter 1 and 2.
Okay.
Is that okay?
I'm fine with that.
And we are accepting that chapter 1 and 2 deals with the legal background and the history of trade of cannabis.
Not the entire history of trade, but up to 1850 would be the elements of trade in chapter 1, and the prohibition of cannabis in chapter 2.
Absolutely. So those are the only two chapters we're going to rely on. Correct?
Yes, I may have stated one or two things that I considered relevant. I believe if you look
That you consider, sorry?
relevant. If you look at my summary, I believe if you look at 2.117,
Page.
18,
Sorry, page.
Okay.
845, my lord.
Yes. You said 2.1.17 and
17, 18, 19, and 20. Those weren't dealt with in chapter 1 and 2. But the methodology involved with coming to those conclusions was fairly straightforward. Newspaper articles, things widely available.
Now,
But other than that, yes, it's all 1 and 2 years.
yes.
Yeah.
So we focused on chapters 1 and 2, basically.
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Now, I would like us to look at page 863.
863.
Paragraph 3.
Paragraph 3, the anomalous reporting.
In this area of your discussion, you're talking about the value or the street value of cannabis.
Yes.
Now, I would like you to read that paragraph specifically into the record.
One example of such anomalous reporting can be found in the case of 2 seizures that occurred in Grahamstown in November 2008 and the 27th of August 2009. Calculated from figures in newspaper reports following the August 2009 seizure, it seems that the Grahamstown police determined the street value of cannabis as 70 cents per gram. This is a figure which, in my experience, is extremely low and only possible if the quality of the seized cannabis was pitiful on both occasions. This would be an unlikely coincidence, and so although it was reported that 1.2 million rands worth of cannabis was seized, I would suggest that the actual figure was no less than double that.
You're referring to specific cases here, and you talk about your own experience. What experience are you referring to here in pricing?
I'm referring to the research that I conducted, where I would go out. I mean, this does deal with Chapter 3 and 4, but where I would go out and I would look for smugglers and dealers and growers and that sort of thing, and attempt to get some understanding of how the trade worked.
So your experience in this regard refers to the interviews you conducted, I believe, with Willie and Slimy. Is it William and Slimy particularly?
There were a number, yes. Yes.
And you're saying we deal with this in Chapter 3 and 4?
Yes, this is part of the introduction, which will deal with a number of different elements across all the chapters. This specifically deals with 3 and 4.
So your experience, when you're saying in my experience, you are speaking about
My experience of conducting the research.
the interviews you conducted.
Not just the interviews, but what I saw while I was there, and you go through different areas where cultivation is high. You see a lot of cannabis. You see a lot of variation in the cannabis. Yeah. But again, like I say, this was part of Chapter 3 and 4.
So I believe that is the part that we can discard.
Yes, why not?
Now, you wrote this thesis in 2009, correct?
Yes, I submitted at the end of 2009, yes.
What motivated you to consider this specific subject?
It's hard to say, really. I thought it would be just something interesting to do. You know, it's such a polarized issue. And when I looked at it, I got the feeling like it should be depolarized. And I think a lot of the reason why I did this in the first place was to try and break down the polarization. You know, I think I say it in here as well, that people treat cannabis as if it's either like a panacea that will save the world, or they treat it as this demonic substance that will destroy society. And when I looked at it and the more I read, it seemed like just a plant to me. Yes, an interesting plant that's been used by society in various ways and demonized in various ways for, whatever reason. But it seemed a lot more complex than people were making it out to be. And I decided to do it. I decided to write this history to try and depolarize the issue.
But we do accept, though, you do accept that you do not have any scientific knowledge on cannabis.
I do accept that I don't have any scientific knowledge on cannabis. I think that as a historian, it's my obligation to read broadly. I don't have any scientific training, but I did, for example, there's a lot of botanical information here that I think provided some insight. And as a historian, I looked at that, and I saw, like a responsible historian, I guess, I saw the ways that the science would affect the changes and continuity that we find over time.
And you also accept that you do not have any legal basis and or legal understanding of the law as it's evolved up to today on the use and or prohibition of cannabis?
Well, no, I don't really accept that. I think it's a lot more accessible than the scientific information. And while I might not have a clear idea of how, for example, the court system works, I mean, this is the first time I've been in a high court, I think that the way that the law plays out on the ground is a social issue. And I think my understanding of the experiences of people under the law, is a solid understanding, perhaps.
Mr. Patterson, your answer in short.
Are you asking me if I have any legal training?
No. I'm not asking if you have any legal training. I'm saying you do not have any legal knowledge. You do not have any information on whether or not cannabis, even up until today, the legal position on its, why it is still legal and anything else. You don't have any such knowledge whatsoever.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question? That seemed to be
You do not have
very
any
sweeping.
knowledge on the law. For example, from 1994 up to now, you wrote this thesis, you submitted this in 2009.
Yes.
You do not know any law that you can refer to that deals with cannabis in South Africa up to today.
Hang on, are you asking me whether I can refer to any law that
I'm
deals
not asking
with
you to
cannabis?
refer. I'm asking you if you know anything about the law as it stands with regards to cannabis in South Africa.
I know that it's partly covered by the 1992 Drugs and Drug Trafficking Act.
That's all you know.
As far as the current situation goes, I believe isn't the Medicines Act deals with cannabis? Is that the name of it?
Well, we will submit. We will argue.
As far as the current conditions of cannabis go in South Africa, I will acknowledge I don't know the current status of the law.
Thank you very much. Now, just to cover that up and to sum it up, Mr. Patterson. You've made a statement at page 871.
871. Yes.
Specifically, the first paragraph, the last two paragraphs, the last two lines of the first paragraph.
The last two lines of the first paragraph. Okay.
It is argued, therefore, that the apartheid system and cannabis prohibition rest on the same theoretical foundation.
Yes.
You make almost the same statement once again at page 908 on paragraph 3.
908. Yes.
Specifically, the last four lines.
While apartheid law sought.
Yes.
Yes.
In fact, we could actually start from the first three lines of that paragraph. It could be said that the reason informing the foundation of apartheid law, and I want us to go slow on it, the reasons informing the foundation of apartheid law and the prohibition of cannabis were almost identical.
Yes.
Which laws are this?
Well, I'm speaking about apartheid law trying to implement the grand apartheid scheme of separate development. Yeah. And to an extent, migrant labor was also informed by the same body of thought. And certainly the position of different race groups as some being superior to others. I think that those all came from the same theoretical foundation as the prohibition of cannabis.
Of cannabis.
The same theoretical foundation, yes.
Let's continue there. In each case, it was a body of laws passed to ensure that the non-white population could be made of use to the white population, while trying to minimize the threat to the former posed to the white ruling class.
Yes.
Can you explain that?
Well, as I've explained with the social Darwinism and the hierarchy that was created, the contact between different racial groups would lead to negative effects on both. But in particular, there was a threat posed by the... It's not a term I like, but those who weren't white, because of the power position that the white colonists had, other racial groups encountering the white population posed a threat to them. So keeping those groups separate would ensure that the white colonist population was protected, if you consider the theory and the foundation of the time. Yeah. I'm sorry if there's more to that question that I haven't answered. Please let me know.
Now, let's finish reading this because I would like to put a simple proposition to you and get your comment.
Mm-hmm.
While apartheid laws sought to keep specific kinds of people in specific social environments, minimizing contact between groups, the laws against cannabis and other vices such as alcohol served to protect the white population in circumstances where such interactions was unavoidable.
Yes.
I would like to put a proposition to you, and this is principally from what you said when you first testified, to say that over time you have grown in academia.
Mm-hmm.
You have come to understand that which is properly grafted and that which is not.
Well, my interpretations and my understanding of the theory, and yes, that's...
Has developed for the better. You say.
Yes, I would say. Yeah.
Now, what this thesis is, we will argue, is nothing but a hypothesis of a young history student who has not yet developed into understanding and who 7 years later is confronted by the same thesis which is sought to be relied on. What would you say to that?
I would say that I came here and I very clearly delineated my field of expertise. Where I thought that was the case, I told the court that that was the case. And when I look at this chapter 2 and this argument here, actually a few things I'd like to say about that. The first thing is that the research I've conducted since that time has reinforced this. Particularly looking at the National Archives and the period between 1904 and 1908 and then 1908 and 1911 has only reinforced the ideas that I discuss here. So I believe I'm more correct, excuse me, I more strongly believe that I'm correct with this than I even did years ago, based on the research that I've done.
You're saying you're more correct now?
I'm saying I'm more convinced
that you're correct.
That I'm correct in this analysis.
Why are you telling us to discard chapter 3 and 4?
Because I'm not as convinced of those.
What exactly are you convinced of?
Of this hypothesis.
Of this hypothesis?
Yes.
Well, your thesis is now incomplete. Half of it is gone.
Yeah.
67
well, half of it
pages.
Isn't relevant to the case.
67 pages of it is gone.
Yeah.
We're left with two chapters.
Yeah.
The one referring to the law, and we will argue at the end that just on that basis and on your own concession of the standing of your own thesis, that the court should not be persuaded to look at 2 chapters of someone who says they are not happy with with half of their own thesis. What do you say to that?
I'd say that's a ridiculous proposition because the analysis is completely different in the 2 sections. My analysis in the latter half of the thesis used a completely different methodology, and I haven't been able to repeat it. But in the first and second chapters here, and especially in chapter 2, I have been able to build on it and go to the archives and sit down and look at the documents involved, and I'm more convinced of it. And that's based on the experience I've gained since I wrote this. It's also worth me mentioning at this point that what I'm saying here isn't particularly controversial, and in fact, there are many academics who completely agree with me on this. Chanok discusses very similar material in his discussion on South African legal culture. I mean, he's an emeritus professor. The reason why I expanded on that and on his work was because he only focused on cannabis for 6 pages. But the entire theoretical foundation, and certainly one of my main ways of understanding theory, is based on Chanok's work.
But you are the one who agrees with Chanok, Mr. Patterson.
I beg your pardon?
You are the one who agrees with his work.
I agree with his methodology, and I agree with what he says about cannabis, and I expand on it and fill in the gaps that he missed. In which case, I'm testing his work, and it's solid. Yeah, it's incredibly solid work. I have a lot of respect for Professor Chanok.
You said you read the pleadings in this matter.
Yes.
Now, are you aware of the law that is applicable for this case?
I believe it's mentioned there. It would be the 1992 Drugs and Drug Trafficking Act, would it not?
Are you aware, Mr. Patterson? Well, of course, that is referred to, especially at page 33. I just wanted to say you could
All right.
refer to that at page 33 of file 1.
33. Amended page. Okay. So here, 26.2, Drugs and Drug Trafficking Act, and Medicines and Related Substances Act. Is this the way I'm referring to?
I think that's page 33, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I was just referring you to it so that you can know the law that is being referred to in this case. Now, you are here as a historian.
Yes.
Correct. Or as a history student, either way.
Well, I'd say historian, yes.
Okay. Well, you are aware, at least from the information you provided through the previous course examination, that history is relevant for purposes of lawmaking.
That's not for me to decide. That's for the court to decide.
No. What I'm saying is you were informed, and of course I believe you have no basis to disagree or no reason to disagree with the fact that history does not play a role for purposes of lawmaking.
Well, I guess I don't have a reason to disagree, but at the same time, I wish it would.
You wish it would?
So if it doesn't, then it should. Yeah.
Well, and if you accept, as I'm putting it to you, that history has no application whatsoever, it has no role to play, your being here as a historian does not help this court now, does it?
If that is the case, then I will acknowledge it. However, I do think that I'm not the right person to answer that question. And what I've just said to you is, in fact, a lay opinion. Because my view is that history should play a part. But as a historian, not as a lawyer, I can't say it does. And I said this on Monday, and I'd like to repeat it. What I've been asked to do is come to the court and present the history of the processes of prohibition. What the court does with that information is entirely up to the court. I personally do think that it's important, and I think especially in a post-colonial country where we are in a process of dealing with decolonization, understanding the colonial impact for the courts is incredibly important, but that's not for me to tell the court. The court must decide what it finds relevant and what it doesn't.
Do you have any interest if the court says, fine, cannabis must be legal, or it shouldn't be? Do you have any interest?
No, not really.
Do you have none?
No. I do feel that, just again, not as a historian, in my lay opinion, I don't think people should go to jail for it. But as for the laws, that's up for the court to decide, and really doesn't affect my life very much.
So we accept that this is your own perspective.
What, saying that people shouldn't go to jail for it?
Your own perspective, your thesis from what you are saying coupled with what you're saying, is your own one-sided perspective on your view on how cannabis should be treated.
No, I haven't said how cannabis should be treated. I said the reasons why it was made illegal in the first place, and I stand by that.
You're saying that cannabis, the prohibition is based on certain grounds which you disagree with.
No, I don't disagree with the grounds that I've stated explicitly several times.
Racism?
Yes, I think it was racist.
You don't agree with the fact that cannabis was prohibited on the basis of racism?
Of course I agree with that. That's exactly what I've
You
been
agree?
saying. Yes.
Now-
I think it was passed on racist grounds. That we were a racist society, passing racist laws. And if you analyze the discussions around cannabis at the time, you will clearly see that those racist views were the determining factor in the prohibition of cannabis.
Is there anywhere, Mr. Patterson, in your thesis where you say use of cannabis must be curtailed and it must not be based on certain information, it must not be allowed?
No, I don't think I would have said that. I was deliberately trying to depolarize the debate.
So it's the one-sided view.
No, it's called a middle ground.
Oh, it's a middle ground.
Yes, yes.
When you express a view that cannabis must be legalized because of one.
I don't express a view that cannabis should be legalized. It's made explicit that that's not my historical opinion.
Your historical opinion, as we have gone through it, Mr. Patterson,
Is that cannabis was prohibited on racist grounds.
and you are saying the laws were irrational.
Yes, racism I do consider to be irrational.
Lawmaking was irrational. That's
If
what
it's
you say.
based on racist grounds, yes.
Mr. Patterson, if the law was rational, what would happen, according to you?
I've got no idea. We would have to look at the science and work from there. But I would like to
Thank
think
you.
that
Thank you, Mr. Patterson.
if cannabis was made illegal on racist grounds, then we should show that that reasoning has changed.
My Lord, I
in my
have
lay
no
opinion.
further questions for this witness.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mahan,
Thank you.
re-examination.
I'll be very brief, my Lord.
Do I need?
No,
Okay.
Mr. Patterson, at the time that cannabis became legislatively prohibited in South Africa,
Yes.
would you say at that time that cannabis was widely used by white South Africans?
No. No, I think it was very seldom used at that stage.
Would you say that at that time it was widely used by non-white South Africans?
Yes, I would. If you look at if you look at the National Archives, the state collected information from about 1904, but really picking up after 1908. And in there are a lot of surveys. You know, I mentioned it on Monday, like mine manager surveys and things like that. And there it's clearly stated that, you know, it was extensively used in certain situations, especially in the rural areas, and in certain mining areas it was extensively used. I think it's safe to say that it was used extensively
By non-white South
by
Africans?
non-white South Africans. Yeah. Although I just have to say I'm not happy with the term non-white. I feel like it's it's a derogatory.
You referred to you having conducted interviews with smugglers and I think it was drug dealers.
Yeah.
Is this a typical or accepted way that a historian conducts research?
Yes, it's a simple methodology. It's the oral history methodology. I use the same methodology now when I look at communal land use and cultural issues. So when I look at cultural change, I use exactly the same methodologies. The only difference would be that in this case I was talking to people about something that wasn't legal.
No further questions, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Mahan.
So,
Thank you, sir. You are excused. Mr. Mahan.
Yes, my lord. As mentioned to your lordship, the plaintiffs require time to read the documents which have been given
So
to us.
you have no other witness today?
No other witnesses, my lord, and the agreement between the respective legal teams is that the matter is now to be, with your lordship's leave, of course, postponed sine die, with the question of costs to be reserved.
Mr. Bokaba, you confirm?
Mr. McCarver is indicating, just for me to confirm on behalf of the defendants, my lord, with one other qualification for the sake of fullness, my lord, the discussions between the parties included both the need for the plaintiffs to consider certain documentation as well as certain circumstances pertaining to their witnesses. That's the full context, my lord, and for those reasons I think my learned friend can just finish off with your lordship.
Yes.
My lord, just for purpose of clarity, there are differing contentions between the parties, obviously.
That
From
will
the
be
plaintiff's
argued.
point of view, there's no issue with witnesses, my lord. From the plaintiff's point of view, the reason for the postponement is purely as a result of the late documentation and the volume of documentation. But in
Well,
no
if
doubt,
there's a
when the
difference-
costs are reserved, there will be an argument.
If there's a difference of opinion, it will be argued when
Yes.
the costs are argued.
That would be so. We just want to make it clear so it's not ever prefaced as a
I see
recent
that there's a
fabrication.
difference of
There,
view on it.
we don't necessarily agree with what is submitted as the lordship.
Mr.
Perhaps
Bokaba.
that's why we said the issue of cost should be reserved.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Bokaba. Thank you. That concludes the matter for the time being until the matter is set down for hearing in due course. The court adjourns.